Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
As Space Force leaders argue that doubling the size of the newest branch of the military is a national security necessity, roughly 25% of the jobs within the service were unfilled in fiscal 2025. And the service lacks guidance for determining how many people it actually needs to accomplish its missions. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more. Anastasia, good to see you.
Hi, Terry.
What did the GAO find out about the size of the Space Force workforce?
Yeah, so the watchdog found that the Space Force had only filled about 13,500 roles of the roughly 18,000 positions it identified as necessary to carry out its missions in fiscal 2025. So that means that about 25% of required positions went unfilled in 2025. On top of that, the Space Force lost a lot of its civilian workforce due to the deferred resignation program and other efforts aimed at shrinking the size of the civilian workforce within the DoD. So the service already lost about 14% of its civilians. At the same time, as we've previously talked about it, Space Force leaders have been pushing for significant growth. They said that while achieving a force of just over 10,000 uniformed personnel, uniformed guardians in 2025 was a really significant milestone for the newest branch of the military, it's just insufficient moving forward for the missions that they have been assigned. So they're also requesting a major increase in spending. They're requesting $71 billion. So yeah, they're looking to grow, but when it comes to their workforce, according to the watchdog, they have these shortfalls and they don't actually know how many personnel they need to accomplish its missions.
So GAO found staffing gaps across uniformed service members, across the civilian sector, but even those staffing gaps may not tell the full story. What else did GAO find?
What they found is that the service hasn't established a process to determine its personnel needs. And it also doesn't have a strategic workforce plan to kind of guide its future growth. There are units' personnel requirements that are based on legacy requirements from the former Air Force Space Command and other services space units. So those requirements are outdated, but they're still applied to the Space Force. And then also, some Space Force units' personnel requirements are based on a mix of analysis, and they're not consistent across the service. So you have these legacy requirements, you have these requirements that are based on a bunch of different analysis, and on top of that, they're not even tracking or they're not accurately tracking the number of contractors, and that's a problem because they rely significantly on contractor personnel support. But if they don't have reliable numbers for the contractors, it's really hard to understand how many personnel they need.
You and I have talked about some initiatives that Space Force is trying to recruit and retain people. Are there other workforce challenges beyond just number of people and number of seats that they're trying to solve here?
So even though, like we mentioned, they lost a bunch of civilian personnel, civilian Space Force service leaders said that they're trying at this current moment to hire about 100 civilians per month. They're looking to increase their uniformed personnel. GAO said that personnel shortfalls is a primary workforce challenge. However, they're struggling in other areas. So they're struggling with retaining cybersecurity and intelligence talent. They're struggling with increasing their enlisted ranks, and they're struggling with hiring civilian personnel, even though they have this goal of 100 civilians per month. That's due to recent DoD policy changes, so that's not surprising. And then it's also due to the competition from the private sector. But I wanted to highlight what GAO heard from Space Force officials about this. So, for instance, Space Systems Command, and they lost a lot of their civilians. They said that they're prioritizing resources for critical functions while kind of pausing for now some important non-critical functions. They said that while that relocation of resources does help to address kind of these most pressing needs, they say that it will most likely negatively affect growth and development of future capabilities.
How does all of this affect the Space Force's plans for future growth? Are they being told to solve their current problems and fill the existing shortfalls first, or are they moving forward with broader plans?
Yeah, I mean, they're pushing for more people, they're pushing for more money, but GAO does want them to develop guidance that is specific to the Space Force, that establishes a process that can accurately determine their personnel requirements. GAO also wants them to develop standard process to accurately and consistently track the number of contractor personnel. They want them to have a workforce plan to guide their future growth. But, like we discussed, they've been advocating for more people, but they're kind of going in blind. They don't exactly know how many personnel they need.
And within the Space Force itself, do they have the capacity to even build those plans?
That's a great question, and they will most likely need some help.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for this story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find all the details at federalnewsnetwork.com.